Viewers, welcome to Scientia Talks. New episode, new host. With me, Falza, Nawallya, Putri, Yunan, and my partner here,
Tiara, Aisyabella, Kasih.
And we're both from International Relations, Class B from Social Science and Politics Faculty of UPN Veteran Jakarta. Today, we will interview a former teacher from a private bilingual school. Now, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Georgiana. I was a former school counselor at junior high level at a private bilingual school in Tangerang Selatan. I took a different career path. So now I am not, just as a disclaimer, I am not actively contributing in the education sector, but I am an independent researcher. So for this discussion, what I will be providing is purely from an independent perspective, or let's say as a community observer. Okay.
Okay. So you said you are now a researcher, and so what does that career path has to do with education still? Can you please elaborate if there's still ties with education?
Okay. So what I do is for higher learning institutions such as universities or colleges, when they are in need of a shadow writer or a staff or a team member, a research team member that needs to do in-depth research for topics in psychology or in creative writing or in digital media, I'm the one who does that for them. So they would seek me for assistance, or they could consult with me for the services that I provide.
I see. That's very interesting. I just learned that today.
Okay.
So today we have a few questions for you, and I hope you could answer those questions with full transparency and with your own opinions. And we would like to hear your takes on these questions. So on the first question, we know that education facilities in urban and rural areas are a bit unequal. So, what do you think are the impacts of these inequalities for the access of education for all communities? And based on your insights, what do you think is the solution that makes education in urban and rural areas more equitable for all?
Okay. So if I may answer the first part of your question, the most obvious impact would be the disparity or the gap between access to education in rural and urban areas, because we know for a fact that education in rural areas have much limited resources. They have a higher possibility of less qualified teachers, a higher probability of overcrowded classrooms, and even outdated learning materials. So that disparity between rural and urban areas, it may lead or result in the quality of graduates in Indonesia, and even the number of students who can graduate at higher education levels. So because we know that for a fact there is this disparity, then the best solution would be, it has to be a multifaceted approach. So you can't just rely, let's say, on the government to intervene or to provide the support to improve this. It has to come from the communities who support education facilities and improvement, and it would require more human resources in terms of people who want to become teachers. It would definitely require funding from the government, from private sectors, from foundations. So if you want to say there is no single answer or a single solution to the problem, to the challenge, I mean. So it requires different approaches or different facets on how we can improve, or at least we can narrow this gap between rural and urban areas so access can be improved.
Okay, so as you mentioned that we cannot only rely on the government to make the gap between rural and urban areas more close, but it has to be a community effort and
does.
from different perspectives and other sectors.
That's
and
right.
we have to work together to close this gap, just not only relying on government funding and others.
That's true. Because if I could give an example, if you only want the government to be involved, but the community isn't prepared to receive funding for education, then it would create a new challenge. Let's say in urban areas, we don't see a big challenge, but in rural areas, if the communities need they need more resources for food or for housing,
Yeah.
they would demand that first before they can put their children in school. So if the government is prepared, but the community isn't prepared, then that would create a new challenge. So it has to be addressed on both sides. When the parents are, when they have more appropriate or adequate living situations, then they will be more likely to support improvements in their children's education. That would be a very tip of the iceberg perspective on that.
Okay, thank you for, because it made, I just realized that how a community and how different aspects of someone's life, especially in rural areas with different challenges, makes it their perspective on how important of education is for their children
That's
and their
true.
family, and makes it, we can't make it the solutions for urban areas and rural areas the same. We have to take different
Exactly.
approaches.
That's true.
Okay, to the next question. What do you think can be learned from foreign education systems to improve the quality of education in Indonesia? I mean, like, what kind of methods that can be shown to make the learning effective?
Uh, from my personal point of view, if you mention what can be learned from foreign countries or foreign education systems, it really depends on which area you're looking at. Because Indonesia has a lot of potential to improve its education system, but it really depends on what exactly is it that we're trying to improve. So let's say if you want to mention a foreign country, you can say let's take the East Asian region, like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Their focus is on standardized assessments. So what they do is they equip their students or the student force to focus on math, sciences, and languages. So that's the East Asian region. But if we want to focus on like Scandinavian or Nordic countries, what they focus is on student well-being.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you move to a different region like Canada and the States, what they focus on is innovation and technology. So if we ask ourselves like what can we do to improve Indonesia's education system based on what other countries are doing, it depends on what you want to achieve, and that has to be adjusted to our society's context. Like let's say for your generation or the generation that's below you, what are you focusing on now? Are you more interested on technology, and what would be relevant to be applied in the next, let's say, 20 to 30 years? Or do you want to focus on well-being? Or do you want to still focus on, let's say, the old school narrative of math, sciences, and languages? So if you want to improve, let's say, all these three different aspects in education, we can, but do we have the resources for that? And if I could answer the second part of your question, it was about effective learning methods, right? If you want to ask which methods are most effective, you can't exactly see it on a big picture. Like on a big picture, if you want to, let's say, you want to equalize everybody to receive the same courses, the same skills enhancements, it would be difficult. So you have to see it from like an individual point of view. So each person receives education according to their own tailored styles, right? So if you want to say like what is the most effective teaching method, it should be a combination of a little bit of everything, of different teaching methods and styles that are best suited to the student. Okay, so all in all, I think if I could pull back and just see it from a bigger picture, the best learning methods that we can observe or apply from foreign countries is project-based and inquiry-based learning. So we can't stick to textbooks all the time. Students these days, they need to learn from a hands-on or a simulation type of learning method, which is project-based. And in projects, you would be required to cooperate and coordinate with other students. And the next would be inquiry-based learning. So the more inquiries or elicitation is applied in schools, then students would be trained to practice their critical thinking and critical appraisal. So what's being done here is you're practicing a very high order problem solving skill, which is more relevant than only focusing on textbooks. Because, okay, if you want to cover basic maths and sciences, then memorizing from textbooks is okay. But if you want to pull back and see the bigger picture and what would be relevant in the future, then it has to be something that's hands-on, and it has to involve critical appraisal. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So what's interesting that you mentioned that because we said like what foreign methods could be used in Indonesian learning system, but you mentioned that we have to see what's our needs as a country and like what do we want to achieve in the future. So we can't just like take a foreign education system, but we need to tailor it to our needs.
That's true.
And also it also depends on each student, each individual,
Exactly.
because apparently me and her, because we obviously have different ways of
Yeah,
studying.
yeah.
So each person also has to find their own methods that are
Yes.
that makes it effective for them to learn. And also you mentioned that for now the methods that are effective is like project based, like
Yes.
what we're doing now. Apparently it's project based learning.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that critical thinking is also very important. So we can't only focus on textbook like how we used to do it.
Yes, and put it this way, do you think that you would remember what you read in a textbook 5 years from now, or do you think you would remember this interview better in the next 5 years? Which one would,
Of
would
course,
stick to your memory?
Of course, the interview.
Exactly. So
Because-
this is a very small example of that.
Because like maybe I read something even a few days ago, I already forget it, but
That's
like
true.
I'll probably remember this interview like, oh, in a few years, oh, I did this for a project. I interviewed
Yeah.
you for a project that I did back in college. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
makes
Doesn't it?
sense.
Yeah.
Very makes sense. So
Okay.
thank you for answering this question.
Okay, on to the next question. So you used to teach in private bilingual school, right? And what are the teaching methods that you used to teach in your school, and how do they compare to methods in other schools?
Okay, so the school that I taught at applied a government curriculum. So the teaching method was it still focused on basic lectures and direct instructions and preparation for standardized tests and assessments. And before I left the school, there was already a shift in how they wanted to make changes to better equip the students after they graduate by applying more courses and classes or teaching instructions that allowed better understanding and comprehension and critical thinking, which would then be interpreted into more applicable skills that they could use in daily life. So if I could summarize, before I left, it was still based on a government curriculum, so the teaching method was still quite one-directional. But before I left, there was already a shift where the students were required to be involved in more projects, and they were teamed up with classmates who they could coordinate or cooperate with in small groups. And that yielded better results because their test scores improved, their social skills improved, and their critical thinking which was a very good hallmark of success in education, that was also improved.
Okay, thank you. Okay, as you mentioned earlier, that in Indonesia we more prioritize a theoretical side of learning or textbooks, so over than a applicative side. So we more focus on learning from books, textbookly, than doing projects and like applying the materials in real life. So as a result, that we know that the students often tend to memorize the material without actually being taught the material according to the conditionals in a field sense. So how should the learning methods be applied so they can provide students with an understanding that's not only theoretical?
Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the best ways to shift from a textbook or a memorizing approach is to shift into project based learning. But if I could add to that, it's not just about a project based learning method that we could apply where students will be required to cooperate and coordinate together, but we can use different types of methods to support that. For example, we could start integrating technology better, such as the use of devices in classrooms, or we could reinforce or enhance simulations or field trips. Let's say we have schools these days who take their students to, let's say, milk factories or carpentry workshops or museums where they curate art and they preserve art. So this is something that needs to be incorporated into the curriculum more. Other than that, I think that experiential learning is quite important as well. So it's not just about what we read from textbooks or what is being taught by teachers, but how can they experience that in real life? So that would require a certain budget, of course, but it would also require teachers to be sufficiently trained to deliver such methods. So it doesn't stop at what the children's need, but also at what the human resources need to teach students and for them to reach the hallmarks of these practical applications. So if you, let's say, if you're studying sciences and you're only taught on how a seed grows after you plant it and you nurture it, after it sprouts and blossoms into a plant, if you only read it from a textbook, then it's just you're only there to memorize a very fundamental level. But if you're required to actually put your hands on the ground, in the ground, and to actually observe it day by day to see it grow, that would that skill could be interpreted or transformed into different types of skills. So you would learn how to observe, how to record, how to analyze, and these are more crucial compared to just memorizing theories. So that's one way to see it. Or let's say if you have interests in engineering, let's say, if you only study chemistry or physics from a textbook, but you're not actually doing it in a laboratory setting, then you wouldn't know how chemistry and physics actually works in your hands or in the real world. So at some point, other than just understanding the theory, you have to experience it yourself, and that's a key marker of a successful educational outcome.
So as you said, like maybe just by reading a book, we just understand the fundamental part of the material. But sometimes just by reading, we wouldn't understand it fully because we didn't experience it ourselves. So by doing projects or going straight into the field that and the materials that we're learning, it gives us a more broader understanding of the material, and also it gives us different skills to learn, not only the thing that we're just learning in the material. So that's what you said.
I wouldn't say a broader understanding, but a deeper understanding. Because if it's only a broad or a general understanding, then you would only know a very skimmed or a very basic comprehension about what you're studying. But it translates to much more than that. So it's not just about from a textbook context, but how you can apply what is learned from textbooks and that is relevant to your daily life, or that could benefit society at large. That's what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, thanks. Okay, so like a previous answer in the first question, you said that we can't only rely on the government, it has to be a collaboration between all communities. So, what do you think is needed for a collaboration between the government, private sectors, or even an international sector in order to achieve a more inclusive education in Indonesia?
I completely agree that a collaboration is needed because we can't deny the fact that our government has very limited budgeting and we have a lot of areas to improve because before we could improve education from a very basic livelihood standpoint, we still need to address poverty and all that, right? So, when the government is limited, not just in terms of its resources, but in access to let's say certain areas in Indonesia, that's where the international and private sectors play a role. So what they can do is they could guide the government into accessing these areas or these communities that don't have adequate education. And what they can do is they could provide the guidelines, they could provide the training, and they could provide the developmental markers to achieve the outcomes. So that collaboration is needed, and we can't deny the fact that the private sectors and non-governmental organizations, they still have the expertise to assist the government in accessing all these inequitable educational areas, right? So when this collaboration is established, you can't see the results immediately. It will take time, definitely, because we are a very large country, right? And it's difficult to know which areas require the most attention to. So at least the starting point is by accessing it one at a time and to have a priority scale. So which areas require the most attention to, that's where the government, the private sector, or NGOs should play a role in, or where they should team up in. That's what I'm trying to say.
So, as you said, that's why the collaboration between the government, private sectors, and even non-governmental organizations, because they also have the resources that could help the government to make education more inclusive. So we can't only rely on the government.
Okay, if I could add to that, we have organizations on a global scale, such as UNDP and UNICEF and UNFPA, and we have local organizations such as Dompet Duafa and Kita Bisa, who already who've gathered the resources for that, not just in terms of monetary resources, but also the manpower to actually reach these areas that require more attention. And I think that the government is greatly aided by the existence of these organizations because the government has a lot to work on. They have a lot to handle. So if education and welfare could be at least tackled or helped or assisted by these global or local organizations, then it would help the government by far means.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. That was very makes it's more insightful for us too as currently students in the
Yes.
college that we are also learning in a governmental university. So it gives us more insight in how education in Indonesia and how it works and how can we work together to improve it in as a community, and as you said, and what methods or that we could use in the future to make education a better place for children in Indonesia.
Okay, so thank you for your insightful answers. The discussion we had today is very productive and give us a new perspective from education in Indonesia. But before we close this interview session, we would like to give you a little souvenir from Scientia Talks.
Okay.
Okay, much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Okay, that's all for today's episode. Thank you for listening or watching. See you next time.